Hello everybody, I'm Ajit K. Mishra. I'm here again with a session on empathy. Empathy, as we all know, is one of the most powerful life skills today. It has been so for long, but then it has gained currency in our times. So empathy is one such skill that can ensure success for us, both in our personal and our professional lives. And that's the reason why everybody today is talking about empathy, and everybody is eager to develop some empathic or empathetic skills in themselves. So empathy is powerful. That's the only thing we need to remember. What is empathy, by the way? Empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel and see things from their point of view or perspective, and imagine ourselves in their positions. So empathy is basically known as feeling the feeling, or knowing the feeling. So essentially it is about putting ourselves in someone else's position and feel or understand what they must be feeling or experiencing. So that's a wonderful, wonderful skill, because it allows us to get into somebody else's position, get into somebody else's consciousness, and understand how that person may be feeling or thinking, or what that person may be experiencing. Therefore, it's quite powerful. So empathy has various uses, and that's the reason why it is so very important, so very critical to our success. And out of those uses that empathy has, we can think of some very important uses of empathy. The first use is it helps us emotionally understand what others feel. That means feeling the feeling. We can easily understand how others are feeling. We can develop some kind of affinity with their emotions, their feelings. So that way we can understand them better. We can see things from others' point of view. That means we can take perspectives. I can understand how the other person is feeling, or how the other person is thinking about a certain thing. And then we can imagine ourselves in others' positions. So we can promptly forget ourselves and then transfer ourselves to somebody else's position. Or that's almost like getting into somebody else's shoes, and then try to understand how that person, from that particular standpoint, is feeling, experiencing, and thinking about various emotional experiences. How do I know, or how do you know we have empathy? So there are a few signs that we need to look for, either in ourselves or in others, to know whether the other person or we have empathy or not. So it's very important that we are familiar with these signs, so that we can understand what kind of empathy we have and what amount of empathy we have. And in the first place, whether or not we have empathy. So the first sign that somebody has empathy is that somebody is a very sensible listener. And if you can recall the listening skills that I talked about in my past sessions, especially sessions on listening skills, or active listening skills, or reflective listening skills, or relational listening skills, I talked about all these things. One needs to be a sensible listener. Sensible means one understands the other's emotional experiences, the other's feelings, and others' thoughts by listening. So if we do not develop that particular sensible listening skills in ourselves, we cannot be empathetic towards others. For example, somebody is talking about one's bad experiences the last week. And while talking about the bad experiences the last week, the person will definitely talk about those experiences from his or her perspective. And while doing so, the person expects the listener to be sensible towards all those things that the person is talking about. If the listener suddenly interrupts and say, I don't believe, that cannot be, I'm surprised, I'm shocked, like this. So such expressions will definitely lead to some kind of mistrust. And then suddenly the connection between the speaker and the listener will be lost. And no empathy can be cultivated in such a situation. Therefore, one needs to be a very sensible listener so that one can understand the other person's emotions, feelings, and the overall approach to something. So sensible listening will also mean that we approach a speaker with an open-mindedness and flexibility. That means we are not there to interrupt, we are not there to judge the speaker, we are just there to lend some emotional support to the speaker by trying to understand the emotional level or the emotional experiences of that particular person. So therefore, if somebody is a sensible listener, we can always say that person has empathy. The second is you're a source of advice and support. I've already talked about it, that through listening we can establish a great amount of trust between people, or between us on one side and the speakers on the other side. So that's a great source of support and advice. So there are occasions when people need emotional support, psychological support, and that's exactly where they come to us, thinking that in us they will find a bedrock of support, and they can easily rely on us, they can easily confide with us, they can easily count on us, and that is how they can get a channel to express or to release the emotional outbursts or the emotional burden that's disturbing them. So we all know that it's very important for all of us to release our emotional burdens. Otherwise, that will lead to problems for us. That will lead to some kind of psychological imbalances in our mind. Therefore, it's important that we periodically or regularly release our emotional experiences or our emotional baggage or burdens, so that the emotional baggage and the burden doesn't accumulate. We need to find people, find channels in the form of people, so with the help of which we can easily release or channelize our emotional burden or baggage. So therefore, when we find a person who can lend us advice readily and who can lend us support absolutely well, we can always run to such a people in times of crisis, in times of need. And that's the reason why we always find a person, or we always try to find a person who can support us emotionally. So if I think that I am a person who can easily support my friends or people I know emotionally, then I can say I have empathy. The third sign of empathy is that we put the needs of others first. Although it's a very, very difficult task because we cannot put our own interests behind and put others' interests in front. That's not an easy task. That's not an easy job, but we can do so. If I am empathetic, I have empathy, I can easily do so because I can always put the needs of others first. So whenever we look at mothers, you find them replete with empathy or full of empathy, and that's the reason why they always keep the interest of their children first rather than their own interest, because they have that great amount of empathy in them. So they always think about the children, the well-being of the children, the wellness of the children, before they can think about their own well-being. So if we put the needs of others first, then we can be sure that we have empathy. Fourth, if we can tell positive and negative vibes. For example, I'm going to meet my friends, and then after spending a couple of minutes, the initial couple of minutes with my friends, I suddenly feel that one of my friends is sending negative vibes. We always discern that. We have that power. We can easily tell whether a positive vibe is coming or a negative vibe is coming. So whenever we come across positive vibes, we feel like continuing there. And whenever we have negative vibes, we feel so disturbed that we wish we were not there, and we find ways to excuse ourselves and move away from that particular place where we are receiving all sorts of negative vibes. So it's important that I can tell whether it's a positive vibe or a negative vibe. So we can always test. We can ask a person to stand right in front of us. It can be a friend or an acquaintance, and ask the person to first send positive vibes. And then if I can tell, yes, the person is sending positive vibes, even without saying things, through the body language or through certain gestures, certain postures, or even verbally. If I know that person is sending positive vibes, or if I know that person is sending negative vibes, then I can easily say that I have empathy. Once we know the signs of empathy, once we know whether or not we have empathy, it becomes important that we also try to know the uses of empathy. Why should I have empathy? Can't I do without empathy? But then when we look at this particular skill, this particular power, we can easily understand, we can easily say that empathy is powerful. We can do without empathy, but we cannot do well without empathy. With empathy, we can do well, because that is something we need. That is something we need to express towards others, and that is something we need to receive from others. So it's a complete ecosystem or environment that is full of empathy. Empathy helps us overcome emotional numbness or indifferences. There are occasions we do not at all emotionally respond. There is no emotional reactions. We come across people who are emotionally so passive, so indifferent and so numb that they don't experience any emotions. So, for example, a person might see somebody meeting with an accident and then bleeding thereafter, but the person will not be moved by the pain that person is in. The person who has just met with an accident is in. So there's no emotional response from that person. So a person can see somebody else crying in front of him or her, and the person doesn't respond at all, doesn't show any emotional response towards that particular thing. So a person might see somebody else suffering, from an illness, and the person doesn't show any emotional response at all. It's almost like being absolutely neutral, being absolutely disconnected with or from one's own emotions. So when that happens, we can say the person is down with emotional numbness or emotional indifference. So there is a complete emotional passivity, and the person is not showing any emotional response at all. So that is something which can work against us if we all become emotionally numb. So therefore, empathy actually helps us overcome emotional numbness and indifference. At the same time, it also fosters a sense of being connected with life. We all know that there are basic human emotions that we cannot disconnect ourselves from. All those basic human emotions, we are bound to experience, we are bound to carry those basic human emotions with us. Therefore, once we get disconnected from those emotions, that means we are disconnected with life. So that way, empathy will keep us connected with life. That's why empathy is important. Then there's something else. Empathy also results in social well-being. Empathy is an outgoing skill. Of course, it has to do with one's own self, but at the same time, it does a great amount of thing with others around. So it's an outgoing skill. So empathy results in social well-being, which in turn leads to psychological and also physiological well-being. Because if we are socially connected, if we feel socially valued, then we'll always feel connected with life. Otherwise, we won't feel like living. Just look at those people who are socially disconnected. Once a person is socially disconnected, the person will find it very difficult to, continue to live, very difficult to find any purpose or meaning of life, and such people are bound to get into some kind of psychological problems. So therefore, empathy is very important because it fosters our social well-being. When we go out, we interact, we meet people, we build relationships with them, that means we are becoming socially active and we are getting social recognition and appreciation from others, and that's how our social well-being can be confirmed. There is another use of empathy. It heals painful psychological problems including loneliness, anxiety, fear, depression, despair, and shame. We all know these psychological problems can be very, very critical. They can be life-threatening. And that's the reason why we need a great amount of empathy when we deal with people who are experiencing these strong emotions or people who find themselves in such states. So, empathy actually heals all these painful psychological problems that arise from loneliness, anxiety, fear, depression, and various other psychological problems as well. So the pain that one experiences is not visible, that cannot be expressed, it can only be felt. So if a person has empathy, that person can understand the psychological pain of the person who is experiencing loneliness and anxiety or depression. And then the person can easily understand how the person with all these psychological problems is feeling. And that will foster trust, and that will help the person with psychological problems overcome the issues. And then finally, empathy leads to what we call emotional regulation or emotional management. There is no doubt that we humans experience emotions, and we are bound to experience emotions, and all these emotions fluctuate through the day. So one may be happy in the morning and may be very sad during the daytime, and again be very angry in the afternoon and be very, very sad at night. So that is quite likely, that's quite possible, because our emotions fluctuate depending on the kind of experiences that we come across. And those experiences lead to some kind of thoughts in us, and those thoughts result in feelings, emotions, and then we behave in a certain way. If I'm angry, I'll certainly not laugh. If I'm sad, I'll certainly not dance. If I'm happy, I'll of course dance, make merry and shout. And if I'm scared, afraid, I'll definitely not move out of myself. So all these emotions are bound to happen to us. That's not the question. The question is, are we ready to manage those emotions? Am I in a position to know that I'm very angry and there's something that's making me feel very, very angry, and what it is? How can I overcome this angry state of mind? If I can manage, if I can think about my emotional experiences and my emotional state, then that will be called emotional management, because without proper emotional management, it'll be very difficult for us because I may be angry, but the other person is not angry. So just imagine at the workplace, you're suddenly angry, but no other person is angry. And you are expressing your anger. So you'll be losing your face, and you'll be embarrassed, you'll be punished as well for showing your anger, for not being able to regulate or manage your anger. So empathy actually helps us helps us with emotional regulation and emotional management. So if we cultivate, if we develop empathy in ourselves, that means we are in a better position to manage and regulate our emotions. So these are some of the things associated with empathy. I'm sure you have taken note of all these things and you are going to explore empathy yet further. I'm also going to do that when I meet you with a new session the very next time. So until then, it is bye-bye from me. Take care.